This lecture is about problem-based learning, in which students are encouraged to look at a scenario based largely on real life. Problem-based learning is particularly important in this day and age. It tries to develop a whole range of skills, such as working alongside others, such as taking initiative, flexibility, undertaking research, independent research. So it's very important that the students understand that as teachers of the future, it isn't only about developing subject knowledge and understanding values. It's also about the way in which they work with others, and hopefully those skills will stand them in good stead for the future. And I think also give the children the opportunity to learn similar skills at their level. Okay, thanks very much for coming this afternoon. I hope you're enjoying the problem-based learning that you're experiencing, and you're looking forward to the assessments next week. I'm probably not the only one stressed out at the moment thinking about all the assessments you have. What I'd like to do with you this afternoon, though, is just essentially review the progress that you are making in relation to the problem-based learning that we've asked you to follow. It's an opportunity really for you to share with us some of the ideas that you've undertaken. It might be useful, though, just to remind you of what problem-based learning is meant to be about before we talk about how you're getting on. You should know that problem-based learning at its heart is really about encouraging you as learners to take greater responsibility for your own learning. As teachers, you appreciate that's very important, particularly those of you who are going to teach very young children. It actually originated in medicine, of all places, medical education. And the idea in the 1960s in America was that doctors, or those training to be doctors, would look at case histories and would consider how the person became ill, what perhaps the symptoms were, and what they would actually do in terms of advocating some treatments. And today, it's actually quite widespread. I think some of you have done some Googling on it, and you see problem-based learning is in areas such as technology, engineering, food sciences, and initial teacher training. So at its heart then, we've already spoken about the importance of you being active in your learning. And the role then of myself and Catherine and other tutors has meant to be, you'll tell us whether we've met that responsibility, to help structure and support your learning. Just before we get there, this is my new car. On Tuesday, I was driving merrily in Cardiff on my way to a conference. That's what it looked like. Tuesday afternoon, it looked something like that. Okay, a bit of creativity, but something like that. Why am I illustrating the experience of my car? Well, I suppose it's to show you that if you were the doctor treating the driver of that particular car after that traumatic episode, it could be said that the doctor would have to consider all sorts of contexts before reaching a conclusion as to what the best course of action is. So as doctors, on-the-spot doctors, what kinds of factors would he or she need to consider, do you think? What do you think? Louise?
What state of mind would you be in after having crashed your car?
Absolutely. And you probably have personal knowledge, Louise, that on the following day in college, I was stressed big time. Okay? And it's probably true to say that a sensitive doctor would consider not just dishing out pills, but consider the mental state of mind. Any other factors? Joanne?
Previous medical history?
Previous medical history, absolutely. Exactly. Before they diagnose whiplash, what are the other factors? Anything else?
The type of impact of the car, so that they knew which way the body would have gone to diagnose injuries.
Absolutely. In fact, that's very important. Certainly the insurance people and the legal side will need to look at that. So my anecdote is to show you that really problem-based learning is not just confined to teacher training. As teachers, you will appreciate the fact that education is experiencing massive changes, certainly in the last decade. In the Victorian period, there was a great emphasis on knowledge acquisition, transmitting knowledge. That's effectively the role of the teacher, or that was the role, as well as providing an appropriate moral example. But in the modern age, we live in an age of instant communication. I think you'd agree, it's almost like a microwave culture. Everything instantly on hand, okay? DIY learning. We live in an age where, in a way you could call it martini learning. Anytime, any place, anywhere. And maybe that's what problem-based learning could be about. So what I'd like to do then at this stage is just give you one more example to think about how we as teachers manage change and how problem-based learning could help us manage and adjust to change in society. In the 15th century, do you know, teachers were up in arms. Why? Something called the printed book arrived. Now, that changed the way in which people learnt. Rather than attend sermons and lectures, people can actually read for themselves. They can actually open up new worlds of knowledge. I think in the modern age, we're facing similar challenges. Challenges to overcome mindsets. Perhaps the modern day parallel would be technology and the way we use technology and the way in which we embrace it or reject it. How we use and maximise its potential. So problem-based learning is designed to develop the skills in you that employers want. In this particular study, in this particular report by the Department of Education, it looked at what teachers would need in terms of skills in 2020. If you're going to be head teachers then, you're going to be teaching in a different world. But what values and skills that you have now, you're learning now, might still be appropriate then? Well, I would suggest being able to communicate, to present information, will still be necessary. I would argue that you'd still need to know how to work with others as a team. What else? To evaluate information critically. Do you think that's going to be important? Whether it be information off the internet, information in books, whatever. To sum it up, to evaluate it. And perhaps most importantly, towards the end there, being resilient, confident, dealing with things like environmental change. What will schools look like in the future? Preparing young people for those changes ahead of us. In your particular scenario, you know that you've been presented with a letter of complaint written by a parent. Okay, it's a composite letter, full of interesting stories. And your challenge back in January was to work as teams to try and to address those parental concerns. Hopefully, in a few moments, we'll see how some of you are getting on. But it might be useful at this stage just to note that there are real-life challenges that teachers face in, for example, communicating effectively with parents. Many parents are not engaged in the education of their children, and there are reasons for it. It might be work commitments. Some of you are parents yourselves. And you know, juggling family and work life is hard. Would you agree? Yes, Joanne, Sharon, your parents, yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Trying to make childcare arrangements. And sometimes that prevents you from perhaps having the involvement in education that you'd like, or at least in schooling. In the Western Mail yesterday, it reported some amazing figures about parental interest and involvement in education. Let me give you one or two. 1 in 10 parents find it difficult to understand the books that their children read. 1 in 10. How many parents do you think struggle with their children's English homework? What proportion, I wonder? 1 in 5. And 1 in 3 parents encounter difficulties when helping with mathematics. You could say a high proportion of teachers sometimes find it difficult to help children with their mathematics, particularly in secondary school level. So there are real life issues that the letter, which we've now got, begins to address or begins to highlight for us. The letter that the students have been asked to respond to in this scenario is a letter written by a parent, and the parent happens to be a Chinese parent who's newly arrived in the country, who's concerned about the welfare of her children. She obviously is from a different culture, so the students are having to engage with the issues of cultural backgrounds, potential misunderstandings. So, for example, she's concerned about the lack of homework that the children are having in school. She's concerned about the nature of the curriculum, which is quite different from the experience that she has with her children at home in China. So they're trying to deal with those kinds of issues arising from the letter. At this stage, would it be useful just for someone to read out the first part of the letter and comment on how their group has begun to respond to it? We'd like to start off by reading the first part of the letter. James, you volunteered. I was Ryan James.
Dear Mr. Jones, I am worried about my children in the school. Mao, the young one, comes home unhappy. He's not doing very well. I am disappointed when I was told by Miss Fresh at parents' evening that Mao is not needing homework. Why? He is a good worker. She says that the new changes in the curriculum mean that no needs for lots of writing but more play.
Thanks, James. What issues have you picked up as a group, the major issues arising from that letter? Katie?
We said that she wasn't familiar with the new foundation phase curriculum, so rather than trying to explain to her in case she didn't understand, we thought it'd be better for her to come into the classroom environment and see for herself what is happening and how they're learning,
Yes.
and how their learning's increasing through doing the different activities.
The students have met on a regular basis. It's left to them to organise the meetings, it's left to them to decide where they're going to meet, whether it be in a more social setting, and it's left to them to monitor, self-monitor how they're getting on. Now, clearly our role as tutors is to support the students. So what would happen is that groups would invite tutors to meetings, and the tutors then would provide input, guidance regarding the issues that they face. Thank you, Katie, and your group. That's an excellent point. Any other comments there? Nicholas?
Yeah, first of all, we picked out the first line. It's all about Mao's well-being, really. It says he's coming home unhappy. We want to know why Mao's coming home unhappy.
Yes.
So,
is that important in this context, this day and age? Are governments, concerned about children's welfare? Anyone read about that as part of their preparation for this? James?
Well, as our group, we felt that the well-being of the child is the most important issue in the letter, because it should be addressed at any stage in the school. Like most schools have got a school ethos or mission statement which encourages and promotes the well-being of the children and makes a happy learning environment for the children to learn in.
Absolutely. And I think, your group is Bella's group at the back, is it? Have you read about Every Child Matters, Bella?
Yeah, we've read into some of it and kind of making sure that it's not just like the academic side of it, but especially because, well, we've agreed that it's a newly arrived situation, so that every aspect of that is happy. He's happy, but also the impact that whether the parents are unhappy, that might have like an impact on him, and kind of integrating parents and into school and into other social groups.
Absolutely. We'll come back to that point later on. Did you have a comment, Adele?
No, I was just going to say about the Every Child Matters,
Right.
that there's 5 outcomes
Right.
to ensure the well-being of children, and that's been brought out in England.
Yes.
So,
Can you remember what some of those are in your research?
to be healthy,
Yes.
be happy, be safe.
I think, the first is happiness is such an important idea, isn't it? That encourage children, and clearly the child is coming home very unhappy. Other sections of the letter. In this section here, anyone like to just read out that bit there for us, just to have the context? Joanne, would you do that?
Mao has said to me that he's called names in school. He says nothing is done, but I've told him to hit back if need be. Mrs. Telltale, our neighbour, has told me at school gates that this is the best thing to do in this country.
What's your response to that?
When we looked at it, we decided to take it as racist name-calling. And so our first thing as the head would be to, before Mrs. Ying even comes in, would be to contact her and find out exactly what has happened.
Yes.
And we looked at our headmaster is a new headmaster, quite innovative. He wants to introduce telling school strategy,
Yes.
and emphasis to the children, emphasise that bystanders are really important. I think they can reduce bullying by about something like 75%.
Yes.
And schools to have part of their anti-bullying policy, it needs to be really clear procedures. Racist name calling should be even documented separately, where, who by, what was said. In fact, all bullying should be documented, but racist name calling documented separately as well, and dealt with absolute sort of zero tolerance level, really.
I think there's some very good research you've done there. I think behaviour for learning is such a big thing at the moment, certainly in England, the importance of trying to get children to see that they're not telling tales on other children. They're being the good guys, if you like, in supporting each other if there are real difficulties. Anyone find out where typical bullying incidents occur in the kind of landscape of a school? Are there certain sort of spots which are kind of, danger zones or hot spots? Tracy, was it Tracy?
Yeah, the majority of bullying seems to be done at lunchtime and playtimes. Seem to be, and lunchtime supervisors have got a vital role really in in combating bullying within schools.
Absolutely. Adam?
Yeah, to add to that point, although we focused on one of the other issues in the letter, we've said that the name-calling incident actually happened at lunchtime, and we've the monitoring and assessment, the importance of that, the reports that came back from the playground staff and the dinner-time duty staff have actually been used as evidence then for Mrs Ying to see the actual incident, what names has Mao been called, and just really the importance of monitoring and assessment.
Yes, that's some good, sensible suggestions. Thank you for that. There's certainly plenty with bullying in terms of research that you can find out, yes? Just a small point before we come to look at some of the role plays. You know, the way we communicate with parents is critical, isn't it? And there's some wonderful websites out there, like you're familiar with the Plain English campaign? How we use words, and we use jargon in education, don't we? We use words like attainment target, level descriptor, programme of study. You could have a conversation with somebody and just speak in jargon, couldn't you? Don't use language that people really understand. You've got a gobbledygook generator there on that website where you say something like, I can make a window to discuss your organisational concepts. People speak to me in the corridor in jargonese. Oh, I've got a window to see you later. Window of opportunity. So the language that we use in parents' evenings is going to be particularly important. So when we prepare for the evening meeting, we need to think about how we manage our time. We need to think about our physical setup of furniture. Yeah? We need to think about issues such as the way we speak, the way in which we use our body language is going to be particularly important, isn't it? In fact, a large proportion of how we communicate is not through words, but through our gestures, our eye contact, and those kinds of things. On your benches, you have a prompt sheet. And what I'd like to do at this stage of the session is I'd like you to, first of all, remind yourselves, you had this earlier on in the course, and I'd like you to think about the kinds of important skills that you should demonstrate when you are communicating with parents. So on that sheet you'll have things like what? Eye contact? Other things, just shout them out. What else have you got?
Introducing yourself.
Good. How you introduce yourself?
Being sensitive to parents' feelings.
Be sensitive.
Explain clearly.
Explaining clearly.
Let the parents voice their concerns.
Yes.
Don't do all the talking.
Good point, Adele. There's a balance in what you say. So what I want you to do, I want you to use that as a prompt sheet, and we're going to listen to and watch some of the groups and to see how they're getting on. Now, we're all good friends, so we will be critical friends in this instance, okay? Now, my colleague Catherine Bleasdale, is going to overview this point. So, Catherine, would you like to just sort of manage the bit where the students come out and sort of show what we're doing?
Okay, well, as Russell has said, this part is over to you. You've all been practicing, rehearsing, devising your parents' evenings, and you know, having seen the progress that you've made, we're coming close to the assessment now, and as Russell says, you're going to be, as an audience, critical friends that will help to put the final touches to the elements that we're going to see today. My part in today's session, and also leading up to that session, was to encourage the trainees to think about the way in which they present themselves, in which they speak, in which they sort of sit and involve themselves with the parents within that parents' evening. So there's quite a lot of development of their skills. What we're going to look at is a series of snippets, short snippets of your parents' evenings, rather than looking at the whole of the performance. And as we're looking at the snippets of the scenarios, what I'd like you to do as an audience is to consider the elements that you have on that crit sheet, on the checklist that you've been using as you've been preparing for this assessment, and to really think about the ways in which the good points are coming through, you know, the elements that you're seeing with your colleagues as they are doing their role play, but also, as Russell says, being a critical friend, thinking, is there any way in which we could make that scenario, that meeting, a more effective meeting for the parent and for you as the teacher. And I know that you've brought up many different elements that have an effect on parents' evenings, and having been in the situation of being a teacher, having parents' evening and having to go through a series of parents' meetings, after school, into the night, and knowing what you're going to expect or not knowing what you're going to expect, then how to deal with those situations as you're going along can be a challenge. And so for you to have this dry run where it doesn't really matter, but to know the situations and to sort of sense what you can do in those situations is a really useful element to the training that you've received before you go out into the big wide world and have to face it for yourselves. Wish I'd had it when I was at your stage in my career.
Our first scene is at one of the main concerns that we're addressing, which is bullying. We've got Mrs Ying, Mr Jones, the head teacher, and Ms Fresh, the class teacher. Both teachers have covered their duties and classes for the day, so they've got plenty of time to sit to Mrs Ying. Okay, play.
Yes, Mrs Ying. Unfortunately, as I said on the phone, we haven't really been able to chase this up as Mal didn't recognise the boys. We can't identify them. This happened before half term. There's not really a lot we could do, but it shouldn't really be an issue again because we will be implementing a telling school policy, so I think everything should be fine.
Telling? A telling school? Mal he told that lunchtime lady what they were saying, what they were doing. She didn't do anything. Mrs Telltale told me that I should just tell them to hit back. That's all the things you can do in this country.
Pause. Okay, let's have a look what's going on. We've got Mrs Fresh. She's obviously a bit nervous. Let's pull your hair back, shoulders back. Seat forward now, get involved. You're the first port of call Mrs Ying will come to, and build on relationships. Mr Jones, be less aggressive. Enough for the jargon. She doesn't understand what you're saying, okay? You need to explain what you're talking about. Play.
Oh, Mrs Ying, let me assure you, I completely understand how distressing this must be for both you and Mao. And I'd like to inform you that all the children have been informed that it is everybody's business to stop bullying within this school. They know exactly what they're supposed to do now, and that is part of the telling schools approach that Mr Jones has been trying to explain to you. Feel free to come to see me at any time. My door is always open.
Thank you. Stop.
Okay, thank you very much. So, do you notice that the lack of jargon in that second part of the session, plus the way in which the body language changed, made the difference between the parent feeling that she had to defend herself and get a little bit worked up, telling school what's that, you know, to then actually understanding what was going on and feeling that something was being done to change the situation and to try to alleviate the bullying that her son was feeling. The trainees often say that the best training they have is in schools where they are in a real situation. And I guess that in that respect, today's session and the whole PBL assessment really deals with real life. Okay, the characters are fictitious. The letter is make-believe, but they are actually working with real life situations and actually thinking about how they would tackle those in a real life scenario. Okay, now Stacey and Bella's group is going to come and show us the end of the session of a parents' evening. So if you'd like to come out to show us. Now, within this problem-based learning, you've already heard that several of you have taken different approaches. You've interpreted the letter of complaint in different ways. So Bella's group has taken the scenario and they've taken a different angle, if you like, to the other groups we've seen so far. And they're looking at a particular issue. They've taken certain elements and they've decided on the background of the family and their time in Britain, and they're working on that sort of assumption. So I'll leave you to introduce yourselves and to do the role play.
We've just got to the end of the discussion of the issues in the letter, and Mrs Young has had a chance to talk to me, the class teacher, and Sarah's the head teacher. Anna is a family support advisor who works with things like extended schools. So she's here to talk to Mrs. Ying about that, and Katie is the additional language support assistant who would be in the classroom.
Thank you, Mrs. Young. We just have one more issue, and I will actually pass you on to Miss Baker, and she'll be able to explain about the extended schools.
Right, in the school, I'm the family support advisor, and in school time, we also offer an opportunity for parents to come in and complete a course to gain new skills and qualifications.
Does this cost money? Would I have to pay for this?
There is actually funding from the government for parents on low income or earning no income at all, and there's also I've got information here. There's also on flexible working hours, which can be arranged with your workplace, which will provide you with the time and the opportunity to come to these classes if you feel that you would like to come.
Also, as well, to help you, because our school is a multi-ethnic school, I've decided to start an after-school club to support parents and children with their homework. So if you wanted to come along with Ling and Mayo on maybe a Wednesday night after school, to give them some extra English support as well, to help both you and the children.
Will you be able to explain some of the documents and things that they come home with then?
Of course I will, and as a school we've decided that in order to help you, I'm going to translate some of them into Chinese to help you to understand them fully, so that if there's any sheets for you to sign for the children to go on trips, that you'll understand them fully.
Well, that's good, because there was a problem with the ICT. I didn't really know what I was signing, and Ling said to sign it, so I just did.
That's fine. We'll make sure that all that is in order for you.
Okay, thank you very much. What the situation has brought out here, the meeting has brought out here, is the lack of confidence in the English language that has led to all of the difficulties with the ICT, with the bullying and so on, and maths. The cultural and the linguistic elements of the exchange have come to the fore, and you've dealt with those explicitly, which means that the relationships then should improve from that point. So thank you very much. An interesting take on that parents' evening, but one that would be pertinent and would be definitely valuable, especially in an area where you'd have those services on offer to you. The difficulty is if you're in a school with isolated EAL learners, then you are going to find it more difficult to offer what is needed, because it might be down to you. Okay. I felt today that the trainees did very, very well, and that not only were the performances very well done, and they had obviously thought about the way in which they needed to interact as a teacher with parents, but also that when they were put on the spot and asked to refine their performances, that they were able to do that, and they were quite happy to recognise where they maybe could make sort of changes to make things better. Well, thank you ever so much to you all. I wish you good luck. I'm sure you'll all do very well, and that this will have proved to be valuable to you in that preparation. So, diolch yn fawr.
Thanks for that, Catherine. I was very interested to watch the way you communicated with each other. Issues such as the gestures that we use, the eye contact, our posture, pace. Are these important, do you think, when we speak to people? Volume. Sometimes I think we perhaps need to do more in your teacher training and perhaps in your careers, dealing with how to develop our own personal communication skills, the way we relate to each other in so many different contexts, yes? I mean, that was perhaps a formal meeting, but when you speak to parents in school, often it's in which context? In the playground, in the corridor, when they're picking the child up at the end of the day. And those are very important moments, aren't they? The presentation you give in terms of you as an individual and as a school. Do you know, sometimes we say things in meetings to parents and we mean something completely different. We might say, Adele is making satisfactory progress. I wonder what we really mean. For each of these statements, I'd like you to think about what's really meant. Sharon is a born leader. Louise is a lively girl. Adam is easygoing. Lawrence needs to develop a better sense of responsibility. As for Nicholas, we could describe him as imaginative. Joanne, well, she's easily distracted. And Katie often appears tired. In pairs, could you say among yourselves what's really meant by that? I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, just to get a few bits of feedback. What about Sarah and Neil at the front? Any ideas? What do you think we meant by Adele or Sharon there?
Sharon is a born leader. We said tends to take over, very bossy, that kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought we meant bossy. How many others thought bossy? Yes. So in other words, there is a language that you use in the right context. It would not be appropriate to say that Sharon's bossy, one could argue, yes, in the context of talking to her mum. Yes? But we need to be aware of the language, the register that we use. Any other thoughts about any of those comments? What do you think about Lawrence needs to develop a better sense of responsibility? Don't take this personally, by the way. I just,
I think maybe he likes to push the blame onto other people. Maybe if something's gone wrong, he'd like to blame somebody else instead of him and take his own responsibility for doing something that he's done, maybe.
Thank you, Lily. Yes, yes. I think, quite immature in a way, yes, in the way that he's developing in that regard. Any other thoughts? What about Katie there? Often appears tired. What's the kind of dig there, do you think, at the parent?
Earlier bedtime?
Absolutely. Yeah, why don't you send your child to bed? Kate, look at the state of her. Get her to bed early. Come on, parents' charter. How can I teach children half asleep? What we're saying here, I suppose, is that we have to be careful of the language used in right contexts in terms of being sensitive to different needs. This is what's been said about some famous people in school, in their reports to parents. John Lennon is on the road to failure. That's what was written in his school report. George Bush scored average for most things, including intelligence. Be careful what we're saying here. And Princess Diana, she must try to be less emotional in her dealings with others, so said the school report. Sometimes what we write as teachers stays with people forever and beyond. And be careful, we've today spoken about oral feedback, but when we write about children in reports, we need to think very carefully about that. And in your assessment for Part A, you might want to think about that in the words that you use. Okay. In the problem-based learning approach that you've undertaken, you will be aware of the fact that you have been expected to keep records of your meetings. In a moment, we'll evaluate the whole module. And the purpose of those meetings is meant really for you to have an opportunity to share ideas, to share your research findings, to be constructive and supportive. We know that we provided you at the start of the course performers, and you'll have used those performers. I don't know how useful you found them. Did you find it was useful to have a structure to these meetings? Yeah, moderate use, no use, good use. Vote now. Good. All right, okay. Interestingly, I have to tell you this. I mean, I was privileged, and I do count it as a privilege, to be invited to come to some of your meetings. And what I've learned as a tutor is the context of where you learn is of fundamental importance to how you learn. What I mean by that is I have seen different sides to students when I've met in the cafeteria, in the bar, in the non-alcoholic section of the bar, I might add. Because you suddenly see and hear people who will say things who would not ordinarily say something in a big lecture hall. That would be true, wouldn't you agree? Is there a transferable piece of learning you can take with you regarding children then, from that? And if so, what would it be? The context, is it important where you learn? I think it is, isn't it? It changes the kind of social glue, the kind of dynamics. To hear people comment who, as I say, would not normally comment, and comment in a very informed way. And I think the point of these meetings was partly to try and give you structure, to encourage you to develop skills in teaching which you wouldn't perhaps ordinarily cover. For example, organising skills. Now, it's said in any group scenario, you're going to have people who are born leaders, bossy. That might be the case. But you know, the dynamics are important, aren't they? The way in which people respond to that. What I'd like us to do now is to think a little bit more about how well problem-based learning is and has worked. Bear in mind that this is relevant to your standards for qualified teacher status. We know that there are particular standards related to how you communicate with parents and how you work with others. In that sense, it's talking particularly about the way in which we relate to other professionals, like educational psychologists, as well as parents. So what I'd like to do is to throw it open a little bit. Let's move forward to this slide here. Let's have an honest appraisal of what's worked well. Tell me how it is. What are the advantages in your experience of problem-based learning?
I worked in a group of 5, and during our first meeting we split all the issues up and we each researched a couple of things, and then during our second meeting we brought all the information back together and we shared it so that it would help us when we were doing our own individual responses.
Okay.
So it saved us a bit of time in that respect, I think.
So do you think, you know those soft skills I said in the way of introduction, do you think genuinely, and you give us feedback now, do you think genuinely you have developed skills that you would not normally have developed in a kind of a lecture format?
Yeah.
And if so, tell us what those skills are. Gemma's talked about allocating responsibilities. Delegated is a skill. Let's try Tracy. Sorry, Gareth.
You have to learn to compromise.
Right.
You know, there's a time to say what you want to say, and there's a time to take a step back and let somebody else say what they want to say.
That's not easy, is it?
No, not always.
No.
But
No.
it's fine in our group.
Absolutely. Gareth?
It also makes you think in detail about issues that you might not think about.
Yes.
Otherwise, you know, if you've got this scenario and you're working together, you've got to think in detail. So, if, you know, for example, we've got these parents meeting now, and as Catherine said, it's going to be useful to us when we go out in schools because we're going to be facing these issues probably at some point during our career. So it's useful for us to be used in a later date.
Good, thank you. Any other advantages?
I think just being able to be prepared, you know, like Gareth was saying about going out into schools and having to do these things. It's the same kind of thing. I know we've spoken previously about having kind of like a business mind on as well, and it's those kind of things. I think practical activities stay with you longer than actually, you know, listening and writing, and I think actually doing it will stay with you longer and give you a basis to work on when you get to school.
I think it's so true what you say.
Something I've noticed about the PBL approach is that because you've got a scenario with, if you like, characters in the scenario, that the characters become real. So it's a little bit like the EastEnders approach, that you start talking about the characters. I've overheard people talking about these characters within the letter as if they are real people. And I've had conversations myself with people where it seemed as though they are, you know, a real person, a real parent and real children. So that gives you a context to work in. You know, we talk a lot about children having a real context and a purpose for working. And if you like, we're giving you that purpose.
Yes, absolutely. I think the scenario is critical, isn't it? You need to put together a scenario that actually represents reality, or at least near reality, and issues which you will face, you know, in schools as you go along. There are also disadvantages with problem-based learning. Let's be frank. And what are those disadvantages? What are the challenges, the difficulties?
It's a teamwork basis, isn't it? It's making sure that everybody pulls their weight and that everybody does, you know, it's difficult. I mean, our group is fine.
Yeah.
But, you know, you do get some groups that you haven't necessarily chosen everybody to work with.
No.
You've just had to, you know, work together. And there will be differences of opinion. There will be differences and clashes in personality as well. And you've got to get over those and get the best out of everybody.
And how you resolve them, I suppose, is that useful in your careers or just generally in life?
Yeah.
You're resolving difficulties, personality clashes in the staff room. Where do you start? Coffee cup? Which seat you sit in?
Yeah.
You know, that is life, isn't it? Well, thanks. I think the general tenor is that, you know, it's something to develop and hopefully you'll find it relevant to your lives as teachers. Although it's not the same as problem solving, nonetheless, the approach that you undertake will be perhaps similar with young children in schools. My impression of the lecture was that it worked well in the sense that the students responded effectively, that they have certainly demonstrated, not only in today's session, but certainly throughout the course of the module, that they actually respond well to being given the opportunity to work collaboratively. They have disagreements, but part of their experience is to resolve those disagreements. And sometimes they're quite animated, they're quite forceful, and sometimes they're learning social skills, when to take turns, when to allow people the opportunity to express their viewpoints, skills which perhaps are not specifically taught under normal circumstances in lectures and more traditional formal methods of teaching.